on Facebook, and we are recording. So,
Hi, Facebook.
hello, it's around noon on Wednesday, which means it's time for Two on One, a theological pop culture intersectional videocast, podcast conversation
Live chat.
with the two, that is myself, the Reverend Arthur Stewart, and the Reverend Stephanie Kendall, who has two first names, we have decided, joined by a one. Today we are very excited that we are joined by the Reverend Emily Brown, who is out of New York, a UCC minister serving an RCA congregation, and she's here to talk about Jeopardy today. Emily, will you please introduce yourself past my meandering thoughts, please?
Sure, thanks so much for having me. As Arthur said, I am Emily Brown. I grew up in the UCC in central Massachusetts. Was called to ministry right out of college and went to Union Seminary in New York. Served in New York City at Broadway United Church of Christ for about 5 years, and now I'm up here in Hastings-on-Hudson in Westchester County, serving at First Reformed Church here in this sweet little town, very proximate to the city. I'm a mom of two little kids, a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old, also a stepmom to a 16-year-old who mostly lives with his mom. Now I'm a dog mom. We got our puppy about 2 months ago. And I was on Jeopardy. I was on Jeopardy back in 2018 in September, taped in July of 2018. The show aired in September. I did not win my episode, but got to be really good friends with many of my tape day mates, and in particular, the guy who beat me, Kyle Jones. So he and I actually now host a Jeopardy podcast, and we love talking about Jeopardy. I love talking about Jeopardy. So really excited to be here with you all.
And what is the name of your Jeopardy podcast?
Oh, right. Yes, I should have said that. It is Potent Potables.
Oh, that's horrible. I love it.
I know.
Oh, good.
Was Potpourri already taken, or?
No, we did a whole list of Jeopardy puns, and ended up really falling in love with Potent Potables. It's a terrible pun, I know, but
it's so good. I love it.
You can find it on iTunes and Stitcher and all
you
the.
You can find it on all the podcasting things. Our podcasting home is Podbean, but yeah, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, and you can find us on Google Podcasts and Spotify and basically wherever you get your podcasts. So we haven't found one where we're not listed, and when we do, we fix it. So. So yeah, check us out.
I love it. I will say that when Arthur and I started this started, 2-on-1 started out of Arthur and I just loving to talk to each other, these kind of live chats, and it was like,
why shouldn't the rest of the world have access to our
why
program?
not? Yeah. And so when this kind of started to take shape, and we were talking about who do we want to bring on, and we're trying to get a diversity of kind of the ones and the one thing that we're talking about, I immediately thought of you, because I was like, so much of what we're bringing to this is, just a kind of like objective perspective to a viewership, right? And I was like, yes, but Emily has been on. Like, and I have a background in theatrical marketing. I worked in LA for 10 years and did movies. And so like, I have a little bit of the like background of production you on, not just because I think Jeopardy is a really interesting topic. Everyone knows it. It's something that's like really relatable as a touchstone. Some of the things that we bring on are more like last week we did Avett Brothers. Arthur and I had never listened to the Avett Brothers before last week. Now I'm a huge fan of like all these crazy things. So it's changing perspectives. But Jeopardy is something that like just everyone knows. Everyone knows the theme song. It's like one of those things you do and you sing in the playground when you're a kid. And so yeah. I'm really excited that you are joining us and bringing all of your gifts to this space. So thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. It definitely is. It's a huge cultural touchstone, and just once you've been on, you hear it all the time, that people just sort of casually be like, I'll take missing the point for 400, or just the world is so full of Jeopardy references and jokes, and yeah.
Well, I mean,
does it become part of your identity in a way to certain people, to your community? Like, is it part of your ministry now?
Yeah, I mean, this is Hastings-on-Hudson is a small town, so I get sort of recognized on the street all the time now in a way that I didn't before Jeopardy. And yeah, I mean, I have sort of become the Jeopardy pastor, at least locally. I also, I mean, my pastoral identity sort of crosses over into the Jeopardy community also. We have a really strong community of former contestants, some of whom are clergy. You know, Jeopardy features clergy, you know, fairly often. And so, you know, sort of the Jeopardy clergy kind of know each other. Yeah, it's kind of a space where I get to bring my clergy identity in a space where people don't always have a connection or a positive connection with organized religion or Christianity in particular. Yeah.
Okay, so I got to ask, and this is apropos of nothing except just interest. So I love when Alex Trebek hints at like the story you're supposed to tell. So he'll be like, Emily, I understand you once foiled a bank robbery with an odd cooking tool. Like, do they do numerous takes of it, or like, do they warn you what he's going to talk about? Or
okay, so this is it's one take, and you know, Alex is going to do what he's going to do. When you are selected to be a contestant, they have you fill out paperwork, and they have you list 5 topics you could talk about in one sentence. But then you turn the page and there's a list of like 20 prompts to try and get more material from you that you might not normally think of. And then you arrive at the studio at 7:30 on a Monday or Tuesday morning, and they've prepared a card with your name and generally I think it's 3 of your 5 anecdotes, the 3 that they thought were most interesting. If they didn't find 3 they liked in the 5 you listed, then they'll surprise you by pulling from your list of 20 responses to 20-ish prompts. And while they're doing makeup, and I think you fill out legal paperwork, you do makeup. There's an extended briefing about the rules, and sometime in that time they go around to each contestant. They have them tell all 3 stories, and then they say, "All right, I've got my highlighter. I'm going to highlight whichever one we decide on, but Alex is going to do what he's going to do." So they highlight one to try and nudge Alex toward that one.
So did he ask you about the story that was highlighted?
He did not, no.
No?
No, he surprised me. And like a lot of Jeopardy contestants will tell you, and this is true for me as well, that the interview portion is the most nerve-wracking. You can prepare for the trivia quiz game aspect, and you don't have to buzz in on anything you don't want to, but I think a lot of us get more nervous about the interview portion.
Well,
they had highlighted for me a story about my college roommate writing a comic strip about my husband and me and how we met, and giving this comic strip to us as our wedding gift. But I was on Jeopardy in a clerical collar, and so he said, and this was another anecdote on my card, "You're the first female pastor at your church in how many years?" And they had existed for 167 years before calling a female pastor.
Statistically, that just doesn't seem right. Like it seems like it should be a lot sooner than that.
The RCA church started ordaining women in I think, I should know this off the top of my head, but I don't, but relatively recently, I think like the 1970s or something. And they had only had, I think, 2 or 3 transitions between the first ordination of the first female pastor in the RCA and calling me. So, they did a pretty good job, I think. Maybe not so much the denominations that waited so long on women's ordination, but, no hard feelings against my church. There's still a wall of male pastors. I haven't had a portrait done since I started here, so I've got to get a portrait done. But they've got.
We got to get that done for you, yeah.
Yeah, I've got to get that done because there's this wall of, I think, 18 or 19 male pastors.
At my previous setting, there's the hallway of old white guys, and I love some of those old white guys who may or may not be watching this, so forgive me for
Hey guys.
But at least I've lowered the average age a little. I'm on the other side of a doorway, but that's fine.
Yeah.
If they put up my portrait, they may not. Okay, so thank you. I'm sorry. I'm throwing out questions and such. If I were Alex Trebek, I would totally be like, "So Stephanie, I understand you wet the bed until you were 12," just to totally throw you off. But
we all have our gifts. So
the fun fact, this is not theologically relevant, but I love it. I picked this up. I auditioned for Jeopardy some years before the audition that ended up in me getting the call and getting on the show. But at that first audition, I learned that if you hear a contestant say, "That's right, Alex," that is the clue for Alex that he has somehow messed up or misinterpreted or switched his cards, and they have no idea what he's asking them to talk about, and he needs to pivot. So if you hear Alex say, now I understand that, you have an interesting connection with the moon landing, and the contestant says, "That's right, Alex." And he says, "And that must be very interesting. Now, what are you going to do with the money if you win?"
That's such a good tell.
Yeah, that's a good thing to look into.
Oh my goodness.
So I got to tell you, I got to ask, I'm sorry this is all schemata, but I promise you this deals with theology. Does he have cards for answers, or does he just generally kind of know what's happening?
Yeah, he has. Okay, so what he has is like a big map of the board. I believe he has, I didn't get to see his material, but I got to see he had a big piece of paper for, I believe, separate ones for the first and second rounds, and that he had like a Sharpie or something and was crossing off the questions or the clues as he went.
That makes sense that he reads the questions. It fascinates me whenever there's a sports question and all of these, the banker, the physicist, and the pastor all kind of stare at the camera till the 5 seconds runs out because they don't know what NASCAR is. And he'll be like, "The answer was Jeff Gordon." I'm like, "Don't you condescend to them?" Well, you do without your little map, Alex. But
yeah. He says, because during the commercial breaks of the tapings, he'll take audience questions, and so I got to see, I think, 3 different audiences ask him how much of the material he actually knows himself. That question always comes up, and he says about 60%. He knows 60% himself, and the other 40% he's just, he's reading stuff he didn't know. But he says he prepares in advance. They bring him the games the morning of while he's doing wardrobe and makeup and whatever. And he is, according to Jeopardy staff, he's very diligent about asking questions and making sure he really understands the material before he presents it, which I really admire, Some
exegetical work happening before the work. So I'm going to pivot us into, that's right, Emily.
I could ask details questions all day, and I won't, because that's
I will happily answer them all day.
Which, we can, whatever.
We have a mission, Spiff.
We have a mission. No, we don't. So my first question, I always show it so people know I am actually prepared. I too, like Alex, have my map of my board and my actual Sharpie pen. Mm-hmm. So my first question that I was kind of just as we're prepping for all of this came up was, so Jeopardy has some real staying power. First Jeopardy came on in 1964. This iteration of Jeopardy is 1984, I think, continuing. So it's got some staying power. And I think that especially in COVID, especially as people we're doing church in a new way. People are anxious to get back, anxious that if we don't go back, we might lose the momentum of our church communities. So what do you think, or in your experience, the church can learn from Jeopardy's ability to kind of stay through the ages?
I hadn't made that connection. That's really cool. I think, the first thing that comes to mind is that Jeopardy has this combination of novelty and familiarity. That there's this format that we know, it's predictable. I'm thinking about when they did the All-Star games, and they had to kind of deviate from their format. That was it was a tournament where they had former Jeopardy stars play in groups of 3. So one teammate would do the Jeopardy round, one would do the double Jeopardy round, one would do the final Jeopardy round. And because the format was weird and they wanted to show behind the scenes stuff, they had to break it up so that one night they would play only the single Jeopardy round, and then the other night it would be double Jeopardy and final Jeopardy. And folks had a hard time with it. And so I'm thinking about how with Jeopardy, there's a rhythm and a routine to it, that it feels familiar and it feels comforting, and there's always something new. The material is new. There's always something to learn. There's always something to pick up on. Some of the material will be familiar because Jeopardy has its kind of trivia chestnuts that it comes back to, and they try to have the material be pretty accessible to a lay audience. But there's always something new to learn, but still in that kind of familiar, routine, comforting format. And I think that we crave those two things. We crave something new, something engaging, something new to think about or to learn or to focus on, and familiarity. And so I think maybe that's a lesson for us in the church, that we need to find ways to bring the familiar when we're doing something new. And when we're able to do what's familiar, not just sort of be in a rut, but always be thinking about how can we balance that novelty and familiarity.
I like that.
Absolutely. Arthur, yeah. It's like Arthur has a thinking face that I've come to recognize when he's like formulating that question. And then
Yeah, the question that never quite forms.
I love it.
Here's a custard that didn't set. I think there's something to it about novelty and familiarity. Like, everyone should be able to get 60% of the Jeopardy questions, or 40%, or whatever the case is.
Yeah.
And some people should be able to do like 80%. There's the 1% that's Ken Jennings or Mr. Aggressive. I forget his name.
Sour.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does that line up in the church? I mean, here's something that I think the progressive church has struggled with recently. And forgive me for not really knowing the spectrum where RCA lands on it, but I'm assuming A, you're a woman, and B, you're UCC. So I'm going to guess there's a progressive.
Also, her Twitter handle is feminist pastor. So.
Okay, so we're good. In the progressive church, I noticed some people are missing the foundational biblical stuff. And I don't mean doctrine, I mean like the story of Esther.
Mm-hmm.
How do we do that what does it look like congregationally to make sure that there's the 60% everyone knows, without it then being, you have to, the 10 commandments are absolute laws, damn it, as opposed to, here's traditions that built community and made sure there were boundaries. What do we do for these people who love social justice, who show up to our church and have no biblical background?
Yeah. Wow. I don't know if I figured that out.
Yeah.
I mean, and the folks who are in that kind of biblical, like 90%, like the 90% biblical literacy, or more than that. I feel like it's been, for most of them, really shaped and formed from early religious upbringing, right? The folks I know who know the Bible really well, like, this is something evangelicals do really, really well. They do it really well. And I don't know how to catch up adults necessarily on all of that. I've tried, and we've had, in my previous church, we had some pretty good sort of intro to the Bible courses and, things like that. But it sort of makes me wonder about whether we could shape young people in the progressive church and help them build that literacy that some of the more conservative religious movements do, and much more strongly than we do. Yeah.
Well, I think part of it too is, as the three of us were preaching pastors, right? And so part of it is our ability and our responsibility to name spaces in which there is connection. Because I one of the things that I love about Jeopardy, so I think I've shared this with Emily, but I watch Jeopardy almost every night. Like, I just have. And it's just something, I love it. And I'm like weirdly all right at it in my home version. I feel like I would be awful on camera. I'm terrible. Like, I can't, every once in a while I'll pretend to I'll grab a sharp and be like, okay, I'm gonna work on my buzzer skills. But things that I love are when I'm like, oh, I remember a time or a show a couple months ago that had a kind of a relevant, but like a tangential point to this. And I looked it up and did my research, and now I can answer this question because of it, right? And so I think part of it part of when we see those connective tissues is to name them. And that's what we have to do as pastors, is when all of a sudden we're reading Esther, just because, Arthur, you threw it out, when we say, well, there's no God language in here, right? So how do we deal with that as Christians, as people of faith, and how, and use those spaces to say, and here's how it was, even if it's a one-off line in our sermons, to say, and here's how the first hearers of this story more than likely would have encountered it or engaged it.
Yeah, to teach and to contextualize and to make those connections that people might not make themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is in my head the ways in which we start to connect and to continue that relevancy and that expansive understanding of biblical literature, and it in the same way of meeting people where they are, right? Like, because we have to meet people where they are, but we also have to push and engage them. Like, that's the call of the gospel. And so, as someone who did come late to church, right? I didn't pick up a Bible until I was 27. And so what helped me grow and live into this call of being a pastor was seeing those connected spaces, saying, oh, when I was 8, before I knew what God was, I experienced this, and now I can name that as God, and helping others to do the same.
Yeah.
And I think Jeopardy does that. I'm going to kind of go into another one of my random questions. But is there a form of evangelism that comes from Jeopardy because of the broad nature of experiences that influence the questions?
Yeah. I'm not sure if I'm hearing the question in the way you intended it, but I am like, what Jeopardy, like what Jeopardy is trying to do, I think, is like invite people to be curious, to make connections, to welcome new knowledge. That every clue hopefully has a connection to something. They try and fit. A clue is seldom just he was the 16th president. It's almost never just one fact that or you don't. It's got a bunch of connection points often, or it's got like a hidden word play, or it's got all kinds of ways to kind of invite people in, which is kind of the genius of Jeopardy clue writing. And I think there's, Jeopardy is sort of evangelizing for knowledge, in these days, for the existence of facts, right? Like that's that they are real and they matter, that there is truth.
Yep. We'll just go ahead. We'll just go ahead, and that can be a full stop. There is truth.
Emily, all truths matter.
Stop it. Stop it. Get out of here with that.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, I think there may be something there is a kind of evangelism in there, and there's maybe something for us to learn in that way, that it invites various kinds of connection.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So within that, the tricks, the language. So there's always churchies, and there's the problem with churchies. RDW is going to meet on Wednesday for the DFW thing. We'll listen to DMB after going to CBW. Talk to Judy if you want more information.
Oh, Judy.
Actually, Judy's the name of my office manager, and she's wonderful. I think I just heard her get somebody past my office with, he's recording something important. Love you, Judy. Thank you. So I always think back to a college tournament episode, because I think it was as simple as, this is how much dirt is in a hole 3 feet wide by 6 feet deep by 10 feet high. And of course, they're all doing the math, and they're like, what is, they kept saying the same number, which was fascinating. And Alex was like, there's no dirt in a hole. And he keeps going. And sometimes with church stuff, in both good and bad ways, it's like we're saying to each other, there's no dirt in a hole. It's picking up on these turns of phrases and these bits of language. I mean, I wonder how many people have suggested after preaching on Nehemiah that he was seeking to make Israel great again, and what that means for different. That wasn't really a question. It was just a thought.
Yeah.
I do that. And it's probably why I wasn't chosen when I tried out for the teen tournament.
You should try out again.
I always do the test.
Okay, good.
Oh, was like, you're not harboring any ill will or any sort of animosity towards.
I will stand by it. The person who was chosen from St. Louis, it was between me and her. She did horribly. It could have been nerves. It could have just not been her night, but I think they picked the person who was second best so that the winner would come from Philadelphia, where the tournament was happening. But that's what I have to say so I can sleep at night.
I do a lot of work to balance television markets, demographics, all kinds of stuff.
I have a question about that. Sorry, and maybe you'll be able to answer it. Is there an understanding of diverse personalities from participants in your experience, and should that be considered when we build worship teams?
So Jeopardy, Jeopardy does a lot of work to, I think they're, the pool of people who take the test is somewhat disproportionately white, male, young, urban, straight.
None of us.
Yeah. And that's not too surprising, especially because people who've done Quiz Bowl or other kinds of sort of high school and college trivia things see Jeopardy and are like, well, obviously I could do that. And, and they can. Jeopardy is very thoughtful about balancing that contestant pool. Everyone's passed the test. Because people will say, oh, you just got on as a diversity contestant, and that's nonsense. You have to make it through a pretty rigorous testing and audition process to get in. But yes, I think it matters for people to see people like themselves on the Jeopardy stage, and people not like themselves on the Jeopardy stage. I don't think I need to convince anyone here that representation matters.
Well, and within the church, it's always fascinating to me where people are like, well, we want a racially diverse church. And the question is then, are you willing to pay a racially diverse staff?
Right.
Are you willing to understand that white church is a thing and that plenty of other traditions aren't 55 minutes?
Yeah.
Spiff, you've spoken to that experience as well.
Yeah, it was it's one of the true blessings of my current ministry, and was one of my biggest learning curves. Is like I came from a very kind of white upper class church experience, and hey McKinney, and FCCLA. There's it was what it was, right? Those were my experiences. And now I serve a multilingual, multi-ethnic, multicultural community that leans into it, right? Like I was making a joke with a friend the other day. I sent a sermon to her and I was like, can you read this? And I was like, I think it looks really short. She goes, I think it's like 20 minutes. I was like, for our community, that's real short. That's my like COVID short. And and because our community expects these dialogues, because when I'm preaching in person, there's talk back and there's that energy that goes, which is what I'm really missing in this time of, shelter in place. And so, we have diversity matters, inclusion matters. And, we should be, in my opinion, looking at, everything. We need to be looking at everything to make sure that it is diverse, whether it is age diversity or racial diversity or gender diversity, right? Like all these things that we've been taught to say are binary are so expensive. And I think that, at least for in worship, I don't know, that was like a weird tangent of me just being like,
and
yes, diversity matters.
Jeopardy's doing that work, not just with the contestant pool, but also with the material, right? And if you look at older episodes of Jeopardy versus newer, you can see them moving in this direction of trying to expand the trivia canon, trying to say, we're not doing just, US and European history. Like you need to know something about other continents. You need to know something about women. You need to know something about LGBTQ, the LGBTQ movement. And you need to know something about hip hop. You need to know something about rap. You need to know something about blues, right? Like trying to branch out of what's been traditional quizzing material, which is centers white and male experiences and toward a broader conception of what is trivia. And, and we need to be doing the same thing in the church, which we do more effectively if we have a diversity in our leadership.
Well, I like with Ken Jennings, I remember when he was on his meteoric run and he answered like a cocktails category, just like where Alex was like, so you're a Mormon. I think that's how he asked it. And he was like, yeah, but we, flashcards.
Yeah.
I'm big on church education. It's kind of my passion because I'm tired of not saying my congregation is biblically illiterate. I've just noticed that sometimes folks could benefit from Bible study. It's branching out and being able to almost play with the text as well. I promise there's a question in this. There was another instance in which it was, I don't even remember the category, but it was a sexually risque person or a garden tool. And the answer was rake, but Ken Jennings buzzes in and he goes, "What is a hoe?" And he laughs because he knows it's wrong.
Yeah.
And he threw away $800, which at that point didn't matter. But and Alex Trebek missed it, and the rest of the contestant missed. But my dad and I were like, "Oh, this man is very, very, very smart and very fast," and he wasn't wrong. I think I might have sent an email in a comments page to Jeopardy about that. Like, he was not wrong.
Yeah.
He just wasn't right. And I think the question becomes, any church is going to have its understanding of orthodoxy and orthopraxis. There's things we just don't do here. And I think there's a difference between being right and not being wrong. How do we create room for those who are not wrong? Yeah. And is it this? Do we need to make them right, or do we need to just have a much more expansive, much more expansive understanding? And I know this is a vague general question, but on general vagueness.
That's a huge question, and it's something that I'm working on. Jeopardy folks really like being right and making sure other people are right. I think, but there's a humility in knowing that what I feel is right. I don't know. I just need to have a little more humility about that. Another struggle there for me, I know this doesn't answer your question, it's just another question, is how to manage when there are spaces where I'm trying to make space for us to have our different understandings. And then for some people, that's a bridge too far, right? I'm thinking about a time when I said, oh gosh, what was it? That we might have different understandings about what the resurrection is. And that was hard for some folks. That's hard, especially, if you've been raised in a tradition or you've come to believe that everyone's salvation is dependent on believing in the bodily resurrection of Jesus Christ. And then your pastor's up in the pulpit saying, some of us here might not believe in the bodily resurrection of Jesus Christ. And that's okay. There are different ways to understand this. Oof, yeah. And it's a tough balance. It's tough for me when there's something I'm passionate about, and I want everyone to be right. It's tough for me when I'm trying to make space and I find that somebody else's passion is sort of colliding with that. Yeah.
So what is our responsibility, you think, as faith leaders, to not only expand our own understanding of context and culture, but to do so for our parishioners in the way that I would imagine prepping for Jeopardy kind of forces you to? Thinking of Ken as a Mormon who knows cocktails, right?
Yeah.
I think, which is a really great kind of example of to do the work that he was called to do, right? Which is, let's just name it as winning Jeopardy.
Right.
He needed to expand his knowledge base. He needed to engage in things that he was unfamiliar with and to push himself in things that he may not even believe are moral, right? There's a real, at least with alcohol and in Mormons, there's a real kind of question there, and yet engaged with it faithfully, could hold that respectfully.
Yeah.
And I think that especially in today's climate and culture. We can learn a lot from probably Jeopardy prep.
Yeah.
So
Excuse me for 1 second. I know this is totally unprofessional, but I'm not getting paid.
Go.
No, I'm sorry. I'll be right back.
You're right. We'll keep talking.
All right. I mean, something that really comes to mind for me from Jeopardy prep is you can get better at something by practicing it. You can start with something you're bad at.
Hey, church, listen up.
Whether that is knowing cocktails or whether that is expanding beyond very traditional hymnody, right? Or like whatever it is.
Language.
Anti-racism, right? Like it doesn't just fall out of the sky, right? You know, it's not something you're born with or not born with. You get better by practicing, right?
Yeah.
You study, you learn, you try, you fail, you take what you take your failures, you learn from them, you go back, you try again. And that's Jeopardy prep, and that is the life of faith.
So how has Jeopardy influenced your faith life? That's literally one of my questions here. And I think you just like opened that question up for yourself.
Yeah. How has Jeopardy influenced my faith life? I mean, I think Jeopardy is maybe the first place where I fail, where I mean, I don't want to call it a failure, right? But I didn't win. You know, where I really, you know, sort of put myself in a position to fail boldly and publicly. And that's a big spiritual challenge for me. That piece of it, that was hard. I did a lot of studying, but I also did a lot of trying to be emotionally and spiritually prepared to say something embarrassing on air, to be in the red and not participate in Final Jeopardy, right? Like in front of, I mean, the studio audience isn't that big, but you know it's going to be on TV. You know, everyone you know is going to see it. And so doing the spiritual work of being prepared to take a big risk and fail is something that's really kind of carried over into my faith life. I'm not sure I can name any single huge risk in my faith or ministry life that's comparable to Jeopardy, but that's really shaped me. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does. As we have named my context multiple times, you know, like in my preaching, I have not only just for my own faith, but like I name the sin of white supremacy and anti-Black rhetoric and things like that, right? And for a lot of my colleagues, the sermons that I preach, we've had this conversation. Arthur and I have had this conversation where I said, you know, he was like, I was looking for someone to fill in the pulpit. And I was like, I'm happy to do it whenever. And, you know, like, but my style of preaching and my understanding of the gospel is not always where everyone is. Mm-hmm. And there are risks that need to be taken, and risks that we have to, I think our faith lends well to helping us overcome doing that. When you know, I'm an Enneagram 3, I like to win. I am a big accomplishment person. Love it. So the idea of failing publicly, the way that you have named it, terrifies me. Mm-hmm. It is not life-giving. It is what makes me go, oh gosh. And so I appreciated that. I appreciate the way in which you frame that, because that the work and practice that it takes to be bold and to show up as yourself for pastors, for contestants, for humans in this world today, I think is a prophetic moment that we all need to kind of bear witness to together.
Well, what would it mean if the church was a place where we were supposed to fail? If it were, I think about some congregations that are so unwilling to take any sort of initiative or any sort of risk because we might fall flat. Mm-hmm. I'm not necessarily talking about my congregation. I'm not necessarily talking about any of our particular contexts, but you know, the only risk that is worth it is risk that will have the factor we've decided will be accomplished. There's no room for the divine to move or we're doing visioning work right now. Again, I'm not saying we're scared of taking risks. We're doing visioning work right now where we know the first few steps and we know what we're aiming towards, but we don't have anything else planned out because we can't. And I appreciate that of like, I think I would die of embarrassment if I were in the red and could not go on Final Jeopardy. Question about Final Jeopardy. Do you have to lock in your bet first and then answer? Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So during the commercial break, you get a paper and you get a Sharpie, and you can see everyone's scores and you do your math. I say on the podcast, it's the one question you're going to be asked, or unless you finish in the red, and so that's really the one to prepare for.
It's like your 2-on-1 final question.
Yeah.
It's the one question that we give you ahead of time.
Yep.
We give you the song ahead of time because Travis Smith McKee hasn't sent us the song yet, Travis.
Travis is making us a final question song, or so he says.
I'm sorry. Please continue, Emily.
So yes, you have to lock in your wager before you see the question, the clue. Some Jeopardy nerds will get very pedantic about that. It's the game of answers and questions, right? So you call them clues, not questions. But I'm not weird about it, except I know it upsets other people. Anyway, yeah, you lock in your wager based on the relative positions of the players and possibly how you feel about the category, but really you should be making your decision based on the relative positions of the players, not based on the category, except within a window. You might find a window of, okay, I can wager anywhere from 2101 to 49.99. So then you might consider whether you like the category or not. And then they reveal the clue and you write your answer, and that's it.
So thinking of the Final Jeopardy as a kind of, I'm going to phrase this differently. Thinking of like a true daily double as a theological concept, are we supposed to always go all in?
Nope, don't always go. I mean, at least for Jeopardy strategy, don't always go all in on a daily double.
Did you get any of the daily doubles on your episode?
Okay, so yes, I hit 2 of the 3 daily doubles.
Wow.
The first one I hit before, I hit very early in the round. I only had 600, so you can wager up to 1,000 in single Jeopardy. So I wagered 1,000 and I got it. The second daily double, it was my second daily double. It was the third daily double. I hit it. I was trailing. I made a pretty big wager, 4,000, and I missed it. Then I had a pretty solid run of correct responses and was in a pretty strong second place when we went into Final Jeopardy. But the way Jeopardy strategy works, the contestant in first place should make and usually does make what's called a cover bet, which means as long as they get it right, they have more than twice the person in second place, so they win. So that's what happened with Kyle and me. And the guy in third place, Raymond, he was in a distant third, but he made a good size bet and was kind of within reach at the end. But yeah, finished in second place. We had a theological question in there somewhere.
Well, should we always go all in? Is the church?
Should we always go all in? As the church,
or its members, or people of faith,
as people of
it's
faith,
open.
Yeah. I mean, Jeopardy strategy for daily doubles is you consider, right? And you consider how far along you are in the game. You consider where you're positioned relative to the other players. You consider whether you like the category. And there are times when it is the right move to go all in, even if you don't like the category. And there are times when it doesn't matter how much you like the category. If you are in a lock position and it's the last question, you should make the smallest wager you can because, you don't have that much to gain. You have a lot to lose. I'm trying to sort of back my way into the theological answer. I don't know. I think probably more often than in Jeopardy, but I think there's something to be said for attention to context. for kind of knowing where your gifts lie, and going all in or not, as you discern those things. Yeah, it's a big, vague answer, but
No, I like that because there's a whole lot going on. It's not just answering or questioning answers or however we call it.
yeah.
You got to be aware of what other people are making and remember the timing thing. There's that half second between the end of the question and being able to ring in and all that stuff. There's a lot going on, and I think that plays into my answer for the final question, which I should have got the Jeopardy theme up and ready for like when we asked the final question between that and I didn't, so forgive me. We're not there yet.
It's never on you, it's on Travis.
Yeah.
So just going off of I think all of this, and I name one of my spiritual gifts as competition, but does competition writ large have a place in the kind of vision of the kingdom, right?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I have not figured that out theologically. What I've been telling people for some years is that I am in like the least competitive profession there is, or it shouldn't be competitive, right? I feel competitive over the dumbest and most, the things I feel competitive about and the people with whom I perceive competition, like I know it's theologically wrong, right? I am not in a competition with the church down the street for how many people come sit in the pews. That is not like a theologically valid competition, but I'm a very competitive person. And so being on Jeopardy, getting into competitive trivia, this has been like a way for me to try and channel some of that so that I can try and live what I see as truth, which is that we as the church are not in competition with each other. I'm curious if you see a place for competition in the church.
I do, but I see it in joy. Mm-hmm. Like I find joy in being competitive. Mm-hmm. I find joy in winning, but I don't find joy in others losing. So that like the sense, joy in the winning is God's grace or whatever that looks like, lots of layers to that. But like, I can't imagine if we're thinking of kingdom, like what we're building together as something that is holy and good and lifts up the joy in all of us, then yes, there is competition because I'm going to want to play some soccer. I'm going to, I'm going to want to it's more competitive in community building rather than like I'm personally competitive, and I don't think that is part of the kingdom. And I don't think that our competition in which a hierarchical competition is kingdom building, but I think the desire to push ourselves based off of our relationship to others is joyful for me and therefore belongs in the kingdom. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I'm thinking about what is it? It's Hebrews, right? Let us run with perseverance the race that is set before us. Yeah, that kind of ethos.
And I was exactly throw out there the 1 Corinthians thing of like, you don't like train for a real purpose, train to run the race well. Mm-hmm. But it's never so that you outrun anyone else. It's do the best that you are called to do for the sake of it. And if you happen to leave everyone else in the dust, so be it.
Yeah.
Them's be the gifts. Mm-hmm.
So up because I think about that every day as I do 100 push-ups.
Look at you getting so strong. I love it. Which way did that gun show? Squirt guns, because we're not here to promote. Anyways, I'm going to be cognizant of our time, and I'm going to pivot us to our final question.
The category is biblical comparisons. We'll be right back after this.
Exactly. So, Emily, you will get to go first, just because you are our V1. You are our one. Yes, Arthur?
I was going to make sure you asked the question, but can you say it in the form of an answer?
No, I'm not prepared. Can you?
Yes. This comparison is made between. No, I can't. So go ahead.
Yeah, I was like, So the final question every week is what biblical story, character, book, thing reminds you most of Jeopardy or a component of Jeopardy?
Okay, so I was thinking about this, and I thought about this. It's not too surprising. This is one of my favorite weird little things about the Bible. The prologue of the Gospel according to Luke, where the evangelist, who we call Luke, although who knows what his name really was, is explaining why he's writing the Gospel, and that he wanted to get everything correct and in order so that the gospel could be told well. There is this detail-orientedness that is reflected throughout the entire gospel according to Luke, and also the book of Acts, which really fits with a lot of what I love about Jeopardy, that there is this real attention to detail, that it matters to get things right, that being correct and in order somehow sort of serves the purpose of doing our work well, telling our story well. Switching back to Jeopardy for a second, if somebody gives an answer that really should be accepted, there must have been something about that hoe one that you brought up earlier that made it not quite fit with the clue, because they will go back and take an answer that technically fits, even though it wasn't what they were thinking of, right? There's this real devotion to having the facts right. And for me, that fits with Luke's prologue and whole sort of approach to telling the story. That being thorough and complete and detailed, researching every piece of it, there's joy in that. And it's holy work.
Like it.
Yeah.
Arthur, you want to go? Or you want me to go?
And I think on that, I'm gonna tag on to that. I'm preaching through Ephesians right now at Riverside. And man, it's a weird book. And I love referring to the Apostle Paul's letter to the Ephesians, because it wasn't by Paul, it's not a letter, and it wasn't to the Ephesians.
Yeah.
But in it, in chapter 4, it says that we're all called to different work, and it's a fivefold office. It's apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers. Although it might be pastor and teacher, like one phrase in there. And nowhere in Scripture is the description of the present day pastor, who has to be an expert on fellowship, on stewardship, on worship, on pastoral care, on preaching, on anti-racism, pro-reconciliation, on finance and vague first aid, like everything in between. That's not in there because that's stupid and it doesn't work. Sorry, I had to pause for people who might be watching it to understand that it's not sustainable. Anyhow, it's really that it's that same idea of, like with Jeopardy, you're not going to run the board. I mean, you might if you're Ken Jennings, but Ken Jennings drops a few. Nobody has played a perfect game of Jeopardy. And that's the whole point. And if you're going to run a full game, then you're not really playing a game. You're just answering by yourself and demanding they're wrong, like I do when I fold laundry. So I think it's almost like an anti-answer, if that makes sense. Like I'm reminded of the Ephesians 4 fivefold office in spite of Jeopardy. I'm not sure. Biff, over to you.
So I answered this in two parts. My first part is that I said, I think Jeopardy as a whole reminds me of the 1 Corinthians, one body, many parts, that it takes all of these parts. It takes the stories of the people that influence the questions and how they're asked. It's the stories of the contestants. It's Alex's interpretation. It's kind of all of that. In order for Jeopardy to work and to continue to work, everyone's got to kind of keep showing. The world has to keep moving forward. Mm-hmm. And so for me, there was a real kind of down to the production team. It's all everybody there. Needs to show up to do the part that they are brought in to do. And I know that we've talked about movies and everything, and that's true, I guess, of all productions, but Jeopardy has a unique quality in which every question that is asked, or answered is indicative of a storied life, right? It's part of someone's culture, someone's narrative, something that happens, all the different things. And so it takes an understanding of historical showing upness that to keep it moving. And that for me was really kind of, that First Corinthians section. I named Alex specifically as, and this is a very Arthur answer. Sorry, Arthur, like in a half-assed way, which I did not.
My answers are never half-assed.
No, your answers are never half-assed. Your questions are. And so, you named it first, but I named him as the good shepherd in John 10, that knows his sheep and his sheep know him. There's a knowledge understanding, but they are both distinctly separate from each other and yet called to do the same work. And so,
and people like Alex Trebek, like he's, when he announced his pancreatic cancer, like folks were genuinely and still are genuinely concerned.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a real, like there can be Jeopardy without Alex, but the Jeopardy that we know is really cemented in an understanding of Alex as that kind of touched on later. And so for me, that resonated. I'm doing some work in John, clearly, and so like that, for me, there was that truth and knowledge kind of reciprocity that is expected of both contestant and Alex, of Jesus and the good shepherd and the sheep, and us in our communities. And so that's how I answered it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Emily, for your time and for your wisdom and for your experience.
So wonderful.
Emily Brown is the co-host of Potent Potables, a Jeopardy podcast that you can find on any platform that does podcasts. She's also a pastor of a church in Hudson. No.
He's in Houston. Yeah.
I have no idea what y'all just said, but yes,
Hastings on Hudson.
Hastings on Hudson, RTA congregation. She's a marvelous, brilliant, just outstanding guest, and thank you so very much, Emily, for your time and for doing this with us today.
It was an absolute delight to be with you all. Just so fun, and thank you for what you're doing. It's a really great program, and can't wait to see where you go next.
Well, it is a really good program, and what you can do and everybody watching can do, please, if you haven't already, is like us on Facebook and share and make other people like us on Facebook, because we want everyone to watch us all the time. If you are clergy and you have a topic that you just really have a burning desire or smoldering inclination to talk to us about, please do it, because we've done the Avett Brothers and Jeopardy and Wet Hot American Summer and just about everything in between so far. We'd love to talk to you. Coming up, Spiff, who do we got the next few weeks?
Yeah, next week we have UCC pastor Christian Briones. He is in Wisconsin, and we are talking about another thing that I know nothing about, which is My Hero Academia, which is Emily, that was my head tilt too when it was suggested. It is it's a comic. It is a form of manga. Manga.
It's also anime.
Yeah, it's anime. And talking. I hear myself in the background. Anyways, not a problem. So Christian Briones is next week. The following week is Charles Anthony Bryant talking Umbrella Academy, and then the week after that is Schitt's Creek with Aaron Wathen.
Yes. We will have more on our schedule coming up, so you should follow us. You can send us an email if you want at 2on1project@gmail.com. You can tweet at us. You can Instagram with us. Someday I will learn how to use Instagram, but until then, Spiff's going to do great content and conversation. If you're not,
friends, there are story games that I do every week, so check them out on Instagram.
Look at them, and I say the answers out loud to no one. Okay.
All right.
This has been
Have a good one.
Emily, thank you again and again, and I'm going to stop sharing us and being live.